The wind howled across the cliffs of Cedar Harbor as Emma Sullivan's flashlight cut through the darkness. She shouldn't have been out here at midnight, but Mrs. Peterson's frantic call about her missing medication couldn't wait until morning. The elderly woman lived alone in the cottage near the lighthouse, and her heart condition meant every hour mattered. Emma clutched her medical bag tighter as she navigated the rocky path. 24 years of living in this coastal town had taught her to respect the ocean's fury, especially on nights like this when the waves crashed violently against the rocks below. A flash of white caught her eye near the cliff's edge. At first, she thought it was driftwood or debris from the storm, but as she moved closer, her heart stopped. A man lay motionless on the narrow ledge, his expensive suit torn and bloodied, his dark hair matted against his pale face. Emma dropped to her knees beside him, her training taking over. His pulse was weak but steady, his breathing shallow. Blood trickled from a gash on his forehead, and his left arm hung at an unnatural angle. She pressed her fingers to his neck, checking for spinal injuries. "Sir, can you hear me?" she whispered, but he remained unconscious. She pulled out her phone, cursing when she saw no signal. The nearest hospital was 20 minutes away, and in his condition, moving him without proper equipment could kill him. But leaving him here would definitely kill him. Emma made her decision. She carefully positioned herself behind him, supporting his head and neck as she'd been trained. Inch by inch, she managed to pull him away from the cliff's edge to more stable ground. His expensive watch caught the moonlight, and she noticed his manicured hands, so different from the weathered fishermen and dock workers she usually treated. As she worked to stabilize him, cleaning the head wound and fashioning a makeshift sling for his arm, something strange happened. The moment her skin touched his, she felt an electric jolt that had nothing to do with static. His eyes fluttered open for just a second, revealing the most intense gray eyes she'd ever seen, filled with a pain that went far deeper than his physical injuries. "Please," he whispered so quietly she almost missed it. "Let me die." The words hit her like a physical blow. In all her years as a nurse, she'd never heard anyone speak with such raw desperation. His eyes closed again before she could respond, but those words echoed in her mind as she continued working. Emma had seen plenty of accident victims, but something about this man's positioning bothered her. He hadn't fallen from the path above. The angle was wrong, the distance too far. He'd been at the very edge of the cliff, facing the ocean. The terrible possibility crept into her mind that this hadn't been an accident at all. She worked for another hour, using everything in her medical bag to keep him stable. When his breathing became more regular and his pulse stronger, she finally allowed herself to rest. Dawn was breaking over the harbor, painting the sky in soft pastels that seemed almost mocking after the night's drama. As the first rays of sunlight hit his face, Emma got her first clear look at him. Even battered and unconscious, he was striking. High cheekbones, a strong jaw, and skin that spoke of wealth and privilege. His suit, though torn, was clearly expensive, and the watch on his wrist probably cost more than she made in a year. Who was he? And what had brought him to the edge of Cedar Harbor's most dangerous cliff in the middle of the night? Emma's phone finally picked up a signal as the sun rose higher. Within minutes, the paramedics arrived, but she insisted on riding with him to Cedar Harbor General. Something about the way he'd begged her to let him die haunted her. As the ambulance raced through the quiet morning streets, she held his uninjured hand and whispered the same words she'd said to every patient over the years. "You're going to be okay. I promise." But for the first time, she wondered if that promise was what he wanted to hear. The fluorescent lights of Cedar Harbor General hummed overhead as Emma checked her patient's vitals for the third time in an hour. 3 days had passed since she'd found him on the cliff, and he'd been unconscious the entire time. Dr. Martinez had stabilized his injuries, a concussion, broken ribs, and a dislocated shoulder, but the man's refusal to wake up concerned everyone. Emma adjusted his foredrip when his eyes suddenly opened. Those same intense gray eyes that had haunted her thoughts locked onto hers with startling clarity. "You," he said, his voice rough from disuse. "You're the one who found me. I'm Emma Sullivan, your nurse. How are you feeling?" He tried to sit up, but winced at the pain. "Like I got hit by a truck." His gaze swept the hospital room, taking in the generic artwork and standard medical equipment. "Where am I?" "Cedar Harbor General Hospital. You've been unconscious for 3 days." Something flickered across his face. Disappointment? Emma couldn't be sure. "What's your name?" she asked gently. "We need to contact your family." He was quiet for so long she thought he might have fallen asleep again. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that made her chest tighten. "James. James Mitchell." Emma's breath caught. Everyone in Cedar Harbor knew that name. The Mitchell family had built half the town back in the 1800s, and their mansion on the hill had been empty for over a year now. Local gossip said the last heir had disappeared after some kind of tragedy. "Mitchell," she repeated. "As in the old Mitchell estate? You know it." "Everyone does. It's been abandoned since." She stopped herself, realizing she was about to mention the fire that had supposedly killed his fiancée and best friend. "Since the fire. You can say it." James's voice turned bitter. "Since I killed them. The reports said it was an accident." James laughed, but there was no humor in it. Accidents don't usually involve arguments about stolen money and broken engagements, do they? Before Emma could respond, the door burst open. Dr. Martinez entered, followed by a woman Emma didn't recognize. She was tall and elegant, with the same dark hair as James but cold blue eyes that seemed to catalog everything in the room. "Thank God you're awake," the woman said, though her tone suggested relief wasn't her primary emotion. "I've been worried sick." James's entire demeanor changed. The brief vulnerability he'd shown Emma vanished, replaced by a mask of polite indifference. "Catherine, I should have known you'd show up eventually. I'm your sister, James." "Of course I came." Catherine Mitchell turned to Emma with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm sorry, but we need some privacy for family matters." Emma glanced at James, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. As she gathered her charts, she heard Catherine's voice drop to a whisper. "We need to talk about what you remember from that night." Emma closed the door behind her, but couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. In her experience, family members rushed to loved ones' bedsides were usually crying with relief, not conducting what sounded like interrogations. She was updating James's chart at the nurse's station when Dr. Samuel Hayes approached. He was new to Cedar Harbor General, having arrived just 6 months ago, but he'd quickly established himself as the go-to physician for the town's wealthier residents. "Miss Sullivan, I understand you're the one who found Mr. Mitchell." "That's right." Dr. Hayes was a handsome man in his 40s, with silver at his temples and an expensive suit that seemed out of place in their small hospital. His smile was perfectly calibrated to project confidence and trustworthiness. "Remarkable timing. Cedar Harbor's cliffs are dangerous, especially at night. What brought you out there?" Something in his tone made Emma cautious. "A patient needed medication. Mrs. Peterson, near the lighthouse." "Ah yes, the heart patient. Lucky for Mr. Mitchell that you chose that particular route." "I suppose it was." Dr. Hayes leaned against the counter, his eyes studying her face. "You know, there are protocols for situations like this. Patients found in suspicious circumstances often require special handling. I'd be happy to take over Mr. Mitchell's care. Dr. Martinez is handling his case just fine." "Of course, but given the Mitchell family's history, it might be better if someone with more experience managed things." Emma felt a chill run down her spine. "What kind of history?" Before Dr. Hayes could answer, raised voices came from James's room. Catherine's voice carried through the thin walls, sharp with anger. "You can't keep running from this, James. People are asking questions." Emma couldn't make out James's response, but Catherine's next words were crystal clear. "That fire was supposed to solve everything. If you just stayed away like you were supposed to." The conversation stopped abruptly, and Catherine emerged from the room moments later, her face flushed. She swept past the nurse's station without acknowledging Emma or Dr. Hayes. "Family tensions," Dr. Hayes said with a knowing smile. "All the more reason why Mr. Mitchell needs careful handling. I do hope you'll consider my offer to take over his care." Emma watched him walk away, her mind racing. Catherine's words echoed in her head. That fire was supposed to solve everything. What did that mean? And why did Dr. Hayes seem so interested in taking over James's case? She returned to James's room to find him staring out the window at the harbor. His face was pale, and she noticed his hands were trembling slightly. "Your sister seemed upset." Catherine's always upset about something. He turned to look at her, and she saw something in his eyes she hadn't noticed before, fear. "Emma, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest." "Of course. When you found me on the cliff, did it look like I'd fallen?" The question she'd been dreading. Emma sat down in the chair beside his bed, choosing her words carefully. "No. It looked like you'd walked to the edge. James nodded slowly, as if she'd confirmed something he'd already known. I thought so. The problem is, I don't remember going there. I don't remember anything after leaving the lawyer's office that afternoon. What were you doing at the lawyer's office? Trying to find out who's been sending me anonymous letters about the fire. Someone knows something about that night. Something that proves it wasn't an accident. He met her eyes directly, and I have a feeling they're not done with me yet. Emma's hands trembled as she unlocked the door to her small apartment above the pharmacy on Main Street. 2 weeks had passed since James Mitchell's discharge from the hospital, and she hadn't been able to stop thinking about his words. Someone knows something about that night. The way he'd said it, with such certainty mixed with dread, had lodged itself in her mind like a splinter. She'd volunteered to help with his physical therapy, partly out of professional duty and partly because she couldn't shake the feeling that he was in danger. The Mitchell estate sat on the outskirts of town, a sprawling Victorian mansion that had once been the crown jewel of Cedar Harbor. Now it looked like something from a Gothic novel, with boarded windows and gardens choked with weeds. The taxi dropped her off at the rusted iron gates. James had given her the security code, but as she punched in the numbers, she noticed fresh tire tracks in the gravel driveway. Someone else had been here recently. The front door opened before she could knock. James stood there in jeans and a white t-shirt, looking more human than he had in the hospital. The formal distance he'd maintained with the staff was gone, replaced by something that made her pulse quicken. "You came," he said, and she heard genuine surprise in his voice. "I told you I would." He led her through rooms draped in dust covers, their footsteps echoing in the empty corridors. The house felt like a mausoleum, preserved exactly as it had been the night of the fire. They ended up in what had once been a sunroom, now serving as James's makeshift living space. A single chair, a table, and a camping cot were the only furniture. "You're living like this?" Emma asked, shocked. "I can't sleep in the bedrooms. Too many memories." He gestured to the exercise equipment she'd recommended. "I've been doing the stretches you showed me." Emma began her assessment, checking his range of motion and testing his strength. Having her hands on him again brought back that strange electric feeling from the cliff, but she forced herself to focus on the medical aspects. His shoulder was healing well, though he still favored his left side. "The scarring is minimal," she said, examining the surgical site. "You'll have full mobility back within a month." "That's good news." "James, why are you really living here? This place isn't safe." Before he could answer, the sound of a car engine echoed from the driveway. James's entire body went rigid, and Emma saw the same fear in his eyes that she'd noticed at the hospital. "I wasn't expecting anyone," he said quietly. They moved to the window and watched as a sleek black sedan pulled up to the house. Catherine Mitchell emerged first, followed by a man Emma recognized as Dr. Hayes. The third person made Emma's blood run cold. "Who's the woman with them?" she whispered. James's face had gone white. "That's impossible. She's dead." The woman was stunning, with platinum blonde hair and the kind of beauty that turned heads on the street. She wore an expensive red dress and moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to being the center of attention. But it was the way James reacted to seeing her that made Emma's heart sink. "Victoria," he breathed. His supposedly dead fiancée was very much alive. The front door opened without ceremony. Catherine's voice carried through the house, sharp and commanding. "James, we need to talk." Emma moved toward the door, but James grabbed her arm. "Don't let them see you here." "Why not?" "Because I'm starting to understand what's really happening, and if I'm right, you're in danger just by being near me." The footsteps were getting closer. Emma ducked behind the exercise equipment as the three visitors entered the sunroom. From her hiding spot, she could see them clearly but hopefully remained hidden. "Hello, darling," Victoria said, her voice honey-sweet. "Miss me?" James didn't move from his position by the window. "You're supposed to be dead." "Details," Victoria laughed, the sound like breaking glass. "I had some business to take care of. You understand." Catherine moved to stand beside her brother, but there was nothing familial in her posture. "We need to discuss your recent hospital stay." "What about it?" "You talked to people, James. The nurses, other patients. You asked questions about the fire. I have a right to know what happened that night." Dr. Hayes stepped forward, and Emma noticed he was carrying a medical bag. "Your mental state has been fragile since the accident. The trauma, the guilt, the attempted suicide. It's affected your memory." "I didn't try to kill myself." The evidence suggests otherwise, Catherine said coolly. You were found on the cliff, alone, in the middle of the night. Classic suicidal behavior. Emma watched James's face as understanding dawned. They were gaslighting him, making him question his own memories and sanity. You're lying, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Victoria moved closer to him, her movements predatory. Poor James. You always were too trusting. Did you really think I loved you? Did you think our engagement was real? We were together for 2 years. And what a profitable 2 years they were. Access to your bank accounts, your business contacts, your precious family trust. Victoria's mask of sweetness slipped, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. The fire was supposed to be simple. Destroy the evidence of what I'd stolen, disappear with my new identity, and leave you to deal with the aftermath. But you got greedy, Catherine added. You started asking questions, hiring investigators. You were going to expose everything. James looked between his sister and his supposedly dead fiancé. You planned this together. I needed the money, James. The real estate market crashed, and I was leveraged to my eyeballs. Victoria offered me a way out. And Ryan? Did he know? Victoria's laugh was genuinely amused. Ryan was collateral damage. He figured out what we were doing and threatened to tell you. We couldn't let that happen. Emma's hands clenched into fists. They were confessing to murder as casually as discussing the weather. Dr. Hayes opened his medical bag and withdrew a syringe. This will help with your confusion, James. A mild sedative to calm your nerves. What's really in that? James backed away from them. Nothing that will hurt you. Much. Catherine's smile was cruel. You see, we have a problem. Your miraculous rescue has complicated things. People are asking questions again, and that nurse of yours seems particularly interested in your case. Emma's blood turned to ice. They knew about her involvement. Emma Sullivan, Dr. Hayes said, reading from a file. Orphaned at age 8, raised by the nuns at St. Mary's Convent. She's been asking questions about you, James. Visiting during off hours, volunteering for your physical therapy. She's become attached. Leave her out of this, James said, his voice hard. I'm afraid that's not possible, Victoria said. You see, we're going to stage another accident. This time, we'll make sure you don't survive. But first, we need to deal with your little nurse friend. Emma realized she had to get out of there and get help, but as she started to move, her foot caught on the exercise equipment. The metal clanged against the floor, and all 4 people in the room turned toward her hiding spot. Well, Catherine said. Speak of the devil. Emma ran. She burst from behind the equipment and sprinted toward the door, but Dr. Hayes was faster. He grabbed her arm and spun her around, the syringe in his other hand. Perfect timing, he said. 2 accidents are better than 1. James launched himself at the doctor, his injured shoulder forgotten in his desperation to protect Emma. They crashed into the wall, and the syringe went flying. Emma scrambled for the door, but Catherine blocked her path. You really shouldn't have come here, Catherine said, pulling something from her purse. Emma saw the glint of metal and realized it was a gun. Catherine, no. James shouted, still grappling with Dr. Hayes. This is your fault, James. If you'd just stayed away, if you'd just died quietly on that cliff like you were supposed to, none of this would be necessary. Emma looked around desperately for another exit. The windows were too high, and Catherine was blocking the only door. Behind her, she could hear James and Dr. Hayes still fighting, their struggle growing more violent. You killed my parents, she said suddenly, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. The room went silent. Even James and Dr. Hayes stopped fighting. What did you say? Catherine's voice was deadly quiet. Emma's mind raced. Where had those words come from? She didn't remember saying them, but somehow she knew they were true. Thomas and Margaret Sullivan. They were my parents. And you killed them. The silence in the sunroom stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Catherine's gun remained pointed at Emma, but her face had gone pale at the mention of the Sullivan name. That's impossible, Catherine whispered. The Sullivan girl died in the storm with her parents. Emma's heart pounded as fragmented memories began surfacing like debris after a shipwreck. A little girl hiding in a closet while adults argued downstairs. Her father's voice, angry and desperate. I won't let you destroy innocent people, Catherine. Her mother crying. Then the sound of breaking glass and screaming. I didn't die, Emma said, her voice stronger now. The nuns found me 3 days later, half drowned and barely alive. They said my parents' boat capsized in the storm, but that wasn't true, was it? Victoria stepped forward, her predatory smile returning. This is getting interesting. Tell us, little orphan girl, what exactly do you think you remember? James had managed to subdue Dr. Hayes, pinning the older man against the wall. Emma, don't listen to them. We need to get out of here. But Emma couldn't move. The memories were coming faster now, triggered by being in this house where she'd apparently been before. She remembered running through these same hallways as a child, playing hide and seek with a little boy who must have been James. You were my father's business partner, she said to Catherine. He trusted you. Catherine's laugh was bitter. Your father was a naive fool. He discovered our offshore accounts, the money we were moving through the development projects. Instead of keeping his mouth shut like a smart man, he threatened to expose everything. So you killed him. We invited your parents for a private meeting on the yacht. The plan was to convince them to join us, take a cut of the profits, and keep quiet. But Thomas Sullivan was too righteous for his own good. Dr. Hayes, still struggling against James's grip, spoke up. It was supposed to look like an accident. A terrible storm, a tragic boating accident. No one suspected murder. Except you didn't account for me, Emma said. We thought you drowned with them, Catherine admitted. When we heard a child's body was never found, we assumed the ocean had claimed you. The nuns never revealed your real identity, did they? They probably didn't even know. Emma's mind reeled. Sister Margaret had always been vague about the details of her rescue, saying only that God had saved her for a purpose. Now she understood why the nuns had been so protective, why they'd given her a new birthday and carefully avoided talking about her past. James released Dr. Hayes and moved toward Emma, but Catherine swung the gun in his direction. Stay where you are, brother dear. This changes things significantly. How? Victoria demanded, clearly frustrated by this development. Don't you see? Emma Sullivan isn't just some meddling nurse. She's the heir to the Sullivan fortune. When Thomas died, his will left everything to his daughter. Since she was presumed dead, the estate went into probate limbo. But if she's alive, Emma felt the blood drain from her face. What fortune? Your father was smart. Even if he was moral, Catherine said. He had investments, properties, accounts that we couldn't touch after his death. Conservatively, it's worth about $30 million today. $30 million? Emma's knees nearly buckled. Money that legally belongs to you, James said, understanding flooding his face. Catherine, you've been managing those assets illegally for 20 years. Managing them very well, thank you, Catherine snapped. And I'm not about to hand them over to some orphan nurse who doesn't even remember who she really is. The sound of tires on gravel interrupted the tense standoff. Through the window, Emma could see another car approaching the house. This one was different from the black sedan, older, more modest. Dr. Hayes peered out the window and cursed. It's Sheriff Morrison. What's he doing here? Victoria hissed. James smiled grimly. I called him before Emma arrived. Told him I'd received another anonymous letter and wanted to file a report. Catherine's face contorted with rage. You stupid, self-destructive, the letters, Emma interrupted, remembering what James had mentioned in the hospital. You've been receiving anonymous letters about the fire. James nodded, keeping his eyes on Catherine's gun. Someone's been sending me evidence, little pieces at a time. Photos of Victoria in different cities, bank records showing money transfers, even a recording of Catherine talking to someone about cleaning up loose ends. Who's sending them? Emma asked. I don't know, but they started arriving right after I hired that private investigator last year. Someone wants the truth to come out. Sheriff Morrison's heavy footsteps echoed on the front porch. Catherine looked around desperately, clearly trying to calculate her options. Put the gun down, Catherine, James said quietly. It's over. No, it's not. Catherine's voice turned cold and calculating. Sheriff Morrison has been in our pocket for years. Half his campaign funding came from Mitchell Industries. He'll believe whatever story we tell him. Emma heard the front door open and Morrison's voice calling out. Mr. Mitchell, you said you had something to show me? Catherine turned to Victoria and Dr. Hayes. New plan. Emma and James had a lover's quarrel. She brought a gun. There was a struggle, and unfortunately, everyone ended up dead except for the traumatized witnesses who tried to save them. You're insane, Emma breathed. I'm practical. Dr. Hayes will corroborate the story. He's had concerns about James's mental state since the hospital stay, and Emma's obsessive behavior toward her patient raised red flags. The footsteps were getting closer. Emma realized they had maybe 30 seconds before Sheriff Morrison found them. She looked around the room, desperate for anything that could help. Her eyes fell on the exercise equipment she'd been hiding behind earlier. "James," she said quietly, "when I count to 3, duck." He caught her meaning immediately and gave an almost imperceptible nod. 1. Emma shifted her weight, preparing to lunge. 2. She saw James tense, ready to move. 3. Emma threw herself sideways, grabbing one of the heavy dumbbells and hurling it at the window. Glass exploded outward as James dove to the floor. Catherine spun toward the noise, and Emma used the distraction to tackle her, sending the gun skittering across the hardwood floor. Victoria screamed and lunged for the weapon, but Dr. Hayes got there first. He pointed it at Emma with shaking hands. "Everyone stay calm," he said, but his voice betrayed his panic. "We can still salvage this." That's when Sheriff Morrison appeared in the doorway, his own weapon drawn. He took in the scene quickly: the broken window, the struggling women on the floor, Dr. Hayes with the gun. "Everyone freeze," Morrison commanded. "Dr. Hayes, put the weapon down now." Dr. Hayes hesitated, and Emma saw something flicker across his face. Desperation, maybe, or the realization that his carefully constructed life was about to crumble. "Sheriff," he said, his voice steadying, "thank God you're here. These two have been threatening us. Mr. Mitchell's mental state has deteriorated significantly, and I believe Ms. Sullivan has been enabling his delusions." Morrison's eyes narrowed. "That's interesting, Doc, because I just got off the phone with the FBI. Seems they've been investigating some financial irregularities involving the old Mitchell-Sullivan Development Company. They're very interested in talking to all of you." The color drained from Catherine's face. "FBI? Turns out someone's been sending them evidence for months. Bank records, recorded conversations, photographs. They've built quite a case." Emma felt a surge of hope, but Dr. Hayes still had the gun, and his finger was tightening on the trigger. "I won't go to prison," he said quietly. "I won't lose everything I've built." The shot that rang out seemed impossibly loud in the enclosed space. But it wasn't Dr. Hayes who fired. Sheriff Morrison's smoking gun remained trained on Dr. Hayes, who lay crumpled on the floor, clutching his shoulder. The weapon Catherine had been holding skittered across the hardwood as Hayes dropped it, his face contorted in pain and shock. "Should have put it down when I asked nicely," Morrison said grimly, kicking the gun away from Hayes's reach. Emma scrambled to her feet, her ears ringing from the gunshot. James was already moving toward her, checking for injuries with gentle hands that shook slightly. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his gray eyes searching her face. "I'm fine." She looked at the chaos around them. Dr. Hayes bleeding on the floor, Victoria pressed against the wall with her hands raised, Catherine sitting in stunned silence. "How did you know to call the FBI?" Morrison holstered his weapon and pulled out his radio to call for backup and an ambulance. "I didn't call them. They called me. Been investigating your family's business dealings for the better part of a year, Mr. Mitchell." "What?" James looked genuinely confused. "Someone's been feeding them information. High-quality evidence, too. The kind that only comes from the inside." Morrison's eyes swept the room. "Though I'm guessing none of you were expecting this reunion." Victoria finally spoke, her voice no longer honey-sweet, but sharp with panic. "This is all a misunderstanding. I can explain everything." "I'm sure you can," Morrison said dryly. "Why don't you start with how you managed to rise from the dead?" Emma watched Victoria's perfect composure crack. The woman who had seemed so confident moments before now looked like a cornered animal. "The fire was an accident," Victoria began, but Catherine cut her off with a harsh laugh. "Give it up, Victoria. It's over." "Shut up, Catherine. Why should I? You've been blackmailing me for months. Those anonymous letters James has been receiving? That was her." Catherine pointed an accusing finger at Victoria. "She's been playing both sides, feeding information to the FBI while demanding more money from me." Emma felt the pieces clicking into place. "You're the one who's been sending the evidence." Victoria's mask finally slipped completely, revealing something calculating and cold underneath. "I needed insurance. Catherine and I made a deal, but she got greedy. Started talking about eliminating loose ends." She shot a venomous look at Catherine. "I had to protect myself." "By framing your own partner?" James asked. "By documenting everything. Every conversation, every transaction, every plan." I've been recording Catherine for months. Catherine lunged toward Victoria with a snarl, but Morrison stepped between them. Ladies, save it for your lawyers. The sound of sirens grew louder outside. Emma realized this nightmare was finally coming to an end, but she still had questions that needed answers. The night of the fire, she said to Victoria. What really happened? Victoria glanced around the room, seeming to weigh her options. Dr. Hayes was semi-conscious and bleeding. Catherine looked defeated, and Morrison had backup arriving. She appeared to make a decision. Catherine and I had been skimming money from the development projects for over a year. Small amounts at first, then larger ones. We thought we were being clever, but James was starting to ask questions about the books. So you decided to fake your death? Emma said. It was supposed to be simple. Stage a fire, destroy the evidence, disappear with new identities. Catherine would inherit everything as James's only surviving family member, and we'd split the profits. But something went wrong, James said. Victoria's laugh was bitter. Everything went wrong. Ryan showed up that night unexpectedly. He'd figured out what we were doing and wanted to confront you, James. When he saw the gasoline and accelerant we'd prepared, he realized what we were planning. Emma felt sick. So you killed him. Catherine killed him, Victoria corrected. Hit him with a fireplace poker when he tried to call the police. I wanted to abort the whole plan, but Catherine said it was too late. We had to go through with it. And you let me believe I was responsible, James said, his voice heavy with pain and anger. You weren't supposed to feel guilty, Catherine said defensively. You were supposed to die in the fire too. The plan was for you to be found in the wreckage with them, the grieving fiancé who couldn't escape. But James wasn't there that night, Emma realized. Where were you? At my lawyer's office until late. Then I went for a drive to clear my head. When I came home, the fire department was already there. They told me Victoria and Ryan were inside. James's voice cracked slightly. I blamed myself for not being there to save them. Perfect guilt, Victoria said with cruel satisfaction. You were so consumed with remorse that you never questioned the official story. Paramedics burst through the door, followed by FBI agents and more local police. The sunroom suddenly became a crime scene, with Emma and James being separated for individual questioning. Agent Sarah Chun, a no-nonsense woman in her 40s, interviewed Emma in the mansion's library. The room still smelled faintly of smoke and water damage from the fire, and Emma found it hard to concentrate with the memories flooding back. Miss Sullivan, we understand you've recovered memories about your parents' deaths. Can you tell us what you remember? Emma took a shaky breath. My father discovered financial irregularities in his business partnership with Catherine Mitchell. When he threatened to expose them, they invited my parents for a meeting on their yacht. I was supposed to stay home with a babysitter, but I hid in the boat instead. You witnessed the murders? I saw Catherine push my mother overboard during an argument. My father tried to save her, and Dr. Hayes hit him with something. I remember hiding in a storage compartment while they argued about what to do with me. Agent Chin took notes rapidly. How did you survive? The storm that night was terrible. The yacht was damaged, and in the chaos, I was thrown overboard. I managed to grab onto a life preserver and washed up on the rocks 3 days later. The nuns found me and assumed I was just another storm victim. And you've had no memory of this until today? Emma shook her head. I had nightmares sometimes, but I thought they were just childhood fears. Being in this house triggered something. The smell, the layout, the memories of playing here with James when we were children. Agent Chin looked up from her notes. You knew James as a child? Our fathers were business partners. I spent a lot of time here during the summers. More memories were surfacing now, clearer and more detailed. James used to protect me from his sister. Catherine was mean even then, jealous of any attention her parents gave to other children. Miss Sullivan, I need to inform you that based on the evidence we've gathered, you're likely entitled to significant assets from your father's estate. We'll need to verify your identity through DNA testing, but the preliminary evidence is compelling. Emma felt overwhelmed. In the span of a few hours, she'd gone from being an orphan nurse to the survivor of a double murder to the heir of a fortune she'd never known existed. What happens now? Catherine Mitchell and Dr. Hayes will be charged with multiple counts of murder, fraud, and conspiracy. Victoria Chin will likely face reduced charges in exchange for her cooperation, but she'll still serve significant prison time. And James? Agent Chin's expression softened slightly. Mr. Mitchell is a victim in all this. He'll need to cooperate with our investigation, but based on what we know, he had no involvement in any of the crimes. When Emma was finally allowed to see James again, they found themselves alone in the mansion's front hallway. The house felt different now, less oppressive, as if the truth had somehow purged it of its ghosts. "I'm sorry," James said quietly. "About your parents, about everything you've been through. I'm sorry too. You've been carrying guilt for something you didn't do for over a year." They stood in the fading afternoon light, two people who had found each other in the darkest circumstances imaginable. Emma realized that despite everything, the trauma, the revelations, the danger, she felt safer with James than she had anywhere else. "What happens now?" she asked, echoing her question to Agent Chun. James stepped closer, his hand gently touching her cheek. "Now we figure out how to live with the truth. Together, if you'll have me." The kiss was soft, tentative, full of promise and healing. As Emma melted into his arms, she thought about the strange twists of fate that had brought them to this moment. She'd saved his life on the cliff, but in the end, they'd saved each other. 3 weeks after the confrontation at the Mitchell estate, Emma sat in the law offices of Hartwell and Associates in downtown Portland, staring at documents that would change her life forever. The DNA results had confirmed what everyone already knew. She was indeed Emma Sullivan, daughter of Thomas and Margaret Sullivan, and heir to an estate worth considerably more than the $30 million Catherine had mentioned. James sat beside her, his hand warm and steady on hers as attorney Richard Hartwell explained the complexities of her inheritance. The past weeks had been a whirlwind of FBI interviews, media attention, and legal proceedings, but through it all, James had remained her anchor. The Sullivan estate includes not just liquid assets, but also substantial real estate holdings along the Maine coast, Hartwell was saying. "Your father was quite the visionary. He purchased several properties that have appreciated enormously over the past 20 years. Emma tried to focus on the numbers and legal terms, but her mind kept drifting to the manila envelope that had arrived at her apartment that morning. No return address, no postmark she could identify, just her name written in block letters across the front. Inside had been a single photograph and a note. "There's more you need to know. Meet me at the old Sullivan cottage on Spruce Island. Come alone. A friend." She hadn't told James about the envelope yet. After everything they'd been through, the last thing she wanted was to put him in more danger. But the photograph haunted her. It showed her father and another man she didn't recognize, standing beside a boat that wasn't the yacht where her parents had died. "Miss Sullivan?" Hartwell's voice brought her back to the present. "Do you have any questions about the trust structure?" "I'm sorry, could you repeat that?" Hartwell exchanged a glance with James, who squeezed Emma's hand gently. "You seem distracted," James observed. "Everything okay?" Emma forced a smile. "Just overwhelmed. It's a lot to process." After the meeting, they walked along the Portland waterfront, the October air crisp with the promise of winter. Emma pulled her jacket tighter as they passed the docks where fishing boats bobbed in the harbor. The scene reminded her of Cedar Harbor, but somehow that small town felt like part of another lifetime now. "You're thinking about something," James said. "I can practically hear the gears turning." Emma stopped walking and turned to face him. Over the past weeks, she'd come to appreciate not just his physical appearance, though the way his dark hair caught the sunlight still made her heart skip, but his ability to read her moods and emotions with startling accuracy. "James, what do you know about Spruce Island?" His expression grew puzzled. "It's about 10 miles off the coast from Cedar Harbor. Used to be a private retreat for wealthy families in the early 1900s. "Why? Did my father own property there?" "I think so. There were several small cottages that wealthy businessmen used for fishing trips and weekend getaways. Your father mentioned it a few times when I was a kid." Emma pulled the photograph from her purse and handed it to him. "This came in the mail this morning." James studied the image, his brow furrowing. "That's definitely your father, but I don't recognize the other man. The boat looks familiar, though." He looked up at her. "Emma, where did you get this?" She told him about the anonymous note and the request to meet at the cottage. As she spoke, she watched his expression grow increasingly concerned. "Absolutely not," he said when she finished. "After everything that's happened, you're not going anywhere alone to meet some mysterious contact. But what if they have information about my parents? What if there's more to the story that we don't know? Then we'll find out together. I'm not letting you out of my sight." Emma felt a surge of warmth at his protectiveness, but also a flicker of independence. "James, I appreciate your concern, but I need to do this. My whole life has been shaped by secrets and lies. If there's a chance to learn the complete truth about my family, I have to take it. Not alone. They stared at each other for a long moment, and Emma saw something in his eyes she hadn't noticed before. Not just protectiveness, but fear. Fear of losing her. What if it's a trap, he asked quietly. What if Catherine had other accomplices we don't know about? Catherine and Dr. Hayes are in federal custody. Victoria is cooperating with the FBI. Who else could be involved? I don't know, and that's what scares me. Emma reached up and touched his cheek, feeling the slight roughness of stubble under her fingertips. I can't live my life afraid of shadows. These past weeks with you have shown me what it means to really live, but I need to put the past to rest completely. James caught her hand and pressed it against his cheek. Then we do it together. I have a boat, and I know those waters. If you're determined to go to Spruce Island, then I'm going with you. 2 hours later, they were cutting through the choppy waters of the North Atlantic in James's restored fishing boat. The vessel was a classic Maine lobster boat that he'd spent months renovating, and Emma found herself impressed by his skill at the helm. The man who had seemed so broken and lost on the cliff just weeks ago now moved with confidence and purpose. How much farther? She called over the sound of the engine and the wind. About 15 minutes, James replied, adjusting their heading slightly. The island's not much to look at, mostly rocks and scrub pines. The cottages were built to withstand the weather, so they're probably still standing. As Spruce Island came into view, Emma felt a familiar tightness in her chest. The place looked desolate, almost forbidding, with its gray cliffs and sparse vegetation. A small dock extended from a protected cove, and she could see the roof lines of several buildings tucked among the trees. James expertly maneuvered the boat to the dock and secured the lines. The island was eerily quiet except for the sound of waves lapping against the rocks and the cry of seagulls overhead. Which cottage belonged to your father? James asked as they climbed onto the weathered planks of the dock. Emma pulled out the photograph and studied it again. In the background, she could see part of a building with distinctive stone chimneys. I think it's the one with the fieldstone foundation. It looks like it's up that path. They made their way along an overgrown trail that wound through scrub brush and stunted pines. The Sullivan cottage, when they reached it, was larger than Emma had expected, a substantial two-story structure with cedar shingles weathered to a silvery gray. The windows were boarded up, but the building looked structurally sound. Hello, Emma called out. Is anyone here? No response. James tried the front door and found it unlocked. They stepped inside, and Emma immediately smelled the musty odor of a building that had been closed up for years. Dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight that filtered through gaps in the window boards. The cottage was spartanly furnished, but showed signs of recent occupancy. There were fresh ashes in the fireplace, and the kitchen had been cleaned recently. Someone had definitely been staying here. Emma, James called from the back of the cottage. You need to see this. She found him in what had once been a study or office. The walls were covered with photographs, documents, and newspaper clippings connected by colored string like something from a detective movie. At the center of it all was a large photo of her parents. Someone's been investigating the murders, James said grimly. Emma moved closer to examine the display. There were photos of Catherine and Dr. Hayes, bank records, transcripts of conversations, and detailed timelines of events going back 20 years. But what caught her attention was a section of the wall devoted to her own life. Photos of her at different ages, copies of her school records, even recent pictures of her working at Cedar Harbor General. Someone's been watching me my entire life, she whispered. A floorboard creaked behind them, and they spun around to find an elderly man standing in the doorway. He was tall and lean, with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Something about his face seemed familiar. Hello, Emma, he said gently. I've been waiting a long time to meet you properly. Who are you? Emma demanded, though something deep inside her already knew the answer. The man smiled sadly. My name is Robert Sullivan. I'm your uncle, your father's younger brother. And I've spent the last 20 years trying to prove that Catherine Mitchell murdered my brother and sister-in-law. Emma stared at the man claiming to be her uncle, her mind reeling. That's impossible. My father didn't have any siblings. The records, the interviews, all carefully manipulated by Catherine and her associates, Robert Sullivan said, stepping further into the room. Thomas was 5 years older than me. After our parents died when I was 18, I moved to California to finish college. By the time I graduated and returned to Maine, Thomas was already established in business with the Mitchell family. James moved protectively closer to Emma. If you're really her uncle, why didn't you come forward after the murders? Robert's expression grew pained. Because I was supposed to die with them that night. Emma's breath caught. What do you mean? I was visiting Cedar Harbor that week, staying with Thomas and Margaret. The plan was for all three of us to meet with Catherine about some concerning financial discrepancies Thomas had discovered. At the last minute, I got food poisoning and couldn't make the boat trip. He gestured to the wall of evidence behind them. When I heard about the boating accident, I suspected something was wrong. The weather that night wasn't severe enough to sink the Mitchells' yacht, and Thomas was an experienced sailor. I started asking questions, which made me a target. What kind of target? James asked. 2 weeks after the funeral, someone tried to run me off the road. A month later, my apartment in California was burglarized, but nothing was stolen, just ransacked. The message was clear: stop digging or join your brother. Emma studied her supposed uncle's face, looking for any resemblance to the few photos she'd seen of her father. There was something in the set of his jaw, the shape of his eyes, that seemed familiar. So you disappeared, she said. I faked my own death in a hiking accident and created a new identity. It was the only way to safely investigate what really happened. I've been living off the grid for 20 years, gathering evidence, waiting for the right moment to expose the truth. And that moment was now. Robert nodded. When James started asking questions last year and hired that private investigator, I knew Catherine would escalate her efforts to silence him. I began feeding information to the FBI through intermediaries, and when you survived James's incident on the cliff, I realized the endgame was approaching. Emma felt overwhelmed by the revelation, but something still bothered her. If you've been watching me my entire life, why didn't you ever contact me? I grew up thinking I had no family. Pain flashed across Robert's face. Do you have any idea how many times I wanted to? I watched you graduate from nursing school, saw you struggle to make ends meet, wanted desperately to help. But Catherine had people watching for any Sullivan family members who might surface. Your safety depended on everyone believing you were dead. The anonymous letters to James, Emma realized. That was you. Partially. I was working with someone else, someone who had access to information I couldn't get. James frowned. Who? Before Robert could answer, the sound of helicopter rotors filled the air outside. Through the gaps in the boarded windows, Emma could see a black aircraft approaching the island. That's not good, Robert said grimly. We need to leave. Now. Who is it? Emma asked, but she was already moving toward the back of the cottage. Catherine Mitchell posted bail yesterday, Robert said, gathering some documents from the wall. Apparently, her lawyers found a technicality in the arrest warrant. That's impossible, James said. She confessed to multiple murders. Rich people have expensive lawyers, Robert replied bitterly. And Catherine still has assets the FBI hasn't frozen yet. The helicopter was landing on the other side of the island, but Emma could hear vehicles approaching as well. Somehow, Catherine had tracked them here. How did she know we'd come? Emma asked as they hurried toward the cottage's back door. I'm guessing your mysterious meeting invitation didn't come from me, Robert said. I sent you the photograph to get your attention, but I never asked you to come alone. Emma's blood turned cold. The anonymous note had been a trap, designed to lure her away from the safety of the mainland where the FBI could protect her. They emerged from the back of the cottage into the fading daylight. The sun was setting over the Atlantic, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that would have been beautiful under other circumstances. My boat's at the dock, James said. If we can reach it. They'll have people there already, Robert interrupted. Catherine's not taking any chances this time. She needs to eliminate all three of us to prevent the evidence from surfacing. Then how do we get off the island? Robert pointed toward the north side of Spruce Island, where Emma could see the dark outline of another, smaller island about half a mile away. Seal Rock Island. There's an old Coast Guard station there with a working radio. If we can swim across the channel, we can call for help. Swim. Emma looked at the choppy water between the islands. In October? That water's freezing. It's either that or face Catherine's people with guns, Robert said grimly. The sound of footsteps crashing through the underbrush was getting closer. Emma could hear voices calling out search patterns, the kind of organized hunt that suggested Catherine had brought professional help. They made their way carefully through the scrub pines toward the island's north shore, trying to stay quiet while moving as quickly as possible. Behind them, Emma could hear their pursuers spreading out, systematically searching the cottage and surrounding area. "There," someone shouted. "Fresh footprints heading north." "So much for stealth," James muttered. They broke into a run, crashing through the low-hanging branches and thick undergrowth. Emma's nursing shoes weren't designed for this kind of terrain, and she stumbled several times on the uneven ground. When they reached the rocky shore facing Seal Rock Island, Emma's heart sank. The water looked dark and forbidding, with whitecaps indicating strong currents and rough conditions. "I don't know if I can make that swim," she said honestly. James was already pulling off his jacket. "We'll go together. I won't let you drown." "How touching," a familiar voice said behind them. They turned to see Catherine Mitchell emerging from the tree line, flanked by two men in tactical gear carrying assault rifles. She looked different from the last time Emma had seen her. Harder, more desperate, but also more dangerous. "Hello, little brother," Catherine said to James. "Still playing the hero, I see." "Catherine, this is insane," James replied. "The FBI has all the evidence they need. Killing us won't change anything." "Actually, it will change everything," Catherine said. "With you 3 dead and Victoria having unfortunately suffered a jailhouse accident, there won't be anyone left to testify against me. My lawyers are confident they can get the charges reduced to financial irregularities, a white-collar crime with minimal jail time." Emma looked around desperately for options. They were trapped between Catherine's armed men and the freezing Atlantic Ocean, with nowhere to run. "You killed my parents," Emma said, surprising herself with how steady her voice sounded. "Your parents were naive idealists who couldn't see the bigger picture," Catherine replied coldly. "Thomas actually thought he could destroy me over a few $1 million in offshore accounts. He never understood that some things are worth fighting for. Like greed, like survival, like power, like ensuring that people who matter get to keep what they've earned." Robert stepped forward, his hands raised but his voice strong. "It's over, Catherine. Even if you kill us tonight, the evidence is already in federal hands. Other people know the truth." Catherine laughed, but there was no humor in it. "The evidence gathered by a man who's been legally dead for 20 years? Evidence obtained through illegal surveillance and theft? My lawyers will tear it apart in court." One of the armed men spoke quietly into a radio, then addressed Catherine. "Ma'am, we have Coast Guard vessels approaching from the southeast. We need to move." "Perfect timing," Catherine said. "Gentlemen, please escort our friends to the water. Make it look like a tragic accident. 3 people who got caught in rough seas while exploring the island." Emma felt James tense beside her, preparing to fight even though they were hopelessly outnumbered. She reached for his hand, squeezing it tightly, wanting him to know that whatever happened next, she was grateful for the time they'd had together. That's when the first shot rang out from the tree line. One of Catherine's men spun and fell, clutching his shoulder. The second gunman swung his weapon toward the woods, but another shot dropped him as well. "Federal agents," a voice shouted from multiple directions. "Everyone on the ground now." Catherine's face went white as FBI agents emerged from concealment all around them. Agent Chun led the group, her weapon trained on Catherine with unwavering precision. "Catherine Mitchell, you're under arrest for escape, kidnapping, conspiracy to commit murder, and about 15 other charges we'll discuss back on the mainland." As the agents secured Catherine and her wounded accomplices, Emma felt her knees go weak with relief. James caught her before she could fall, pulling her against his chest as the adrenaline finally began to fade. "How did you find us?" Emma asked Agent Chun. "Your uncle's been working with us for months," Chun replied with a slight smile. "The meeting invitation was real. It just wasn't supposed to happen until we had Catherine back in custody. When she posted bail, we had to accelerate the timeline." Emma looked at Robert, understanding dawning. "You've been an FBI informant." "For the past year," he confirmed. "Once I realized Catherine was escalating her efforts to silence James, I knew it was time to come out of hiding and help the Bureau build an airtight case." "And the helicopter?" James asked. "Ours," Agent Chin said. "We've been monitoring Catherine's communications since her release. When we learned about her plan to eliminate the remaining witnesses, we set up our own operation." As they walked back toward the Coast Guard boats that had arrived to transport them to the mainland, Emma felt a strange sense of closure settling over her. The truth about her parents' murders was finally coming to light, and the people responsible would face justice. But more than that, she realized she was no longer alone. She had James, who had proven he would risk everything to protect her. She had Robert, the uncle who had spent 20 years seeking justice for her family. And she had a future that was finally her own to choose. The nightmare that had defined her life for so long was finally over. 6 months later, Emma stood in the restored sunroom of the Mitchell estate, watching the sunrise paint Cedar Harbor in shades of gold and pink. The legal proceedings had finally concluded. Catherine Mitchell had been sentenced to life in prison. Dr. Hayes received 25 years, and Victoria was serving 15 years for her role in the conspiracy. "You're up early," James said softly from the doorway. Emma turned to smile at him, marveling at how much he'd changed since that night on the cliff. The broken, guilt-ridden man had been replaced by someone confident and whole. "I wanted to watch the sunrise from our house," she said, emphasizing the word "our." James crossed the room and wrapped his arms around her from behind. "Our house," he repeated. "I still can't believe you said yes." Emma held up her left hand, admiring the simple engagement ring he'd given her a month ago. The proposal had been perfect, a quiet moment on the restored dock behind the house. "James," he said suddenly, his voice carrying an odd note. "There's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you weeks ago." Emma turned in his arms, studying his face. "What is it?" "The recording that convicted Catherine, Victoria, didn't make it." "I did." The words hit Emma like a physical blow. "You? But how?" "The night of the fire, I came home early and heard Catherine and Victoria planning to burn down the house with me inside it. I recorded their conversation, but when I tried to confront them, Victoria knocked me unconscious." Emma felt the blood drain from her face. "You knew? All this time, you knew what they were planning." "I was convinced no one would believe me. Catherine had already started spreading rumors about my mental state. Robert found my phone in the wreckage and recovered the data months later." Emma stepped back from him, hurt and confusion warring in her chest. "You let me think you were suicidal because of guilt over an accident." "I was suicidal, just not for the reasons everyone thought." "Emma, you have to understand. The knowledge that my own sister had tried to murder me destroyed me. And you didn't trust me enough to tell me the truth. I was terrified you'd leave. You're the only good thing in my life." "That's not fair," Emma said. "You can't put that kind of pressure on me. By not telling me, you made the same choice Catherine did. You decided what was best for me without giving me the option to choose." The comparison hit him like a slap. "You're right. I'm so sorry." Before the conversation could continue, Robert arrived unexpectedly, carrying a large box. He looked between Emma's tear-stained face and James's stricken expression with concern. "I'm sorry if I'm interrupting something," he said carefully. "James just told me he's been lying to me for months," Emma said. Robert set down his box and looked at James with disappointment. "I wondered when you were going to tell her." "Emma, I'm the one who advised him not to tell you initially." "Why?" "Because you just learned about the conspiracy that shaped your entire life." Adding more seemed cruel. Robert opened his box and pulled out a thick folder. "There's something else you need to know." He produced a photograph of a young woman with dark hair holding a baby. "This is Sarah Mitchell, James's mother. She was also my wife." The silence was deafening. Emma stared at the photograph, trying to process the revelation. "James's father and I were both in love with Sarah," Robert explained. "She chose him, but we remained close friends. After she died when James was 5, his father asked me to stay away because my presence was too painful." Emma felt overwhelmed. "So when you were investigating my parents' murders, you were also looking out for James?" "I never stopped looking out for him. When I learned Catherine had tried to kill him, I knew I had to act carefully." James was barely holding on to his sanity. Emma looked at James, really looked at him, and saw the fear in his eyes, not of danger, but of losing her. "I don't know how to trust you again," she said honestly. "Then let me earn it back," James replied. "However long it takes. Please don't let my mistakes destroy what we have." Emma was quiet for a long moment, thinking about everything they'd been through together. Through it all, James had protected her, supported her, loved her with unwavering devotion. "No more secrets," she said finally. "No more protecting me from difficult truths. If we're going to build a life together, it has to be built on complete honesty." Hope flickered in James's eyes. "Does that mean you'll still marry me?" "Ask me again. This time, Ask me as the man who survived his sister's attempt to murder him. Ask me as James Mitchell, not as the victim I rescued." James dropped to one knee. "Emma Sullivan, you are the strongest, most incredible woman I've ever known. You've seen me at my weakest and loved me anyway. I love you not because you saved my life, but because you showed me how to live it. Will you marry me?" Emma felt tears streaming down her face. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." Robert cleared his throat. "I have a wedding gift for you both." He pulled out legal documents. The deed to the original Sullivan cottage on Spruce Island. "I thought you might want a place to create new memories." "There's one more thing," Robert added with a smile. "The island needs a medical clinic. They're looking for a qualified nurse to run it." Emma's breath caught. The idea of starting over somewhere new, somewhere they could build something together, felt perfect. "What do you think?" James asked. "I think it sounds like exactly where we're supposed to be." 3 months later, Emma stood on the ferry deck approaching Spruce Island. The renovated cottage gleamed white against pine trees, and she could see the small medical clinic nearby. James wrapped his arms around her, and she leaned back against his chest, feeling completely content. "Any regrets?" he asked. Emma thought about everything they'd left behind, the painful memories, the secrets, the fear. Then she thought about what lay ahead, a marriage built on honesty, a life devoted to helping others, and a love that had survived the worst. "None," she said firmly. "This is exactly where we're supposed to be." As they prepared to step onto their new home, Emma felt her mother's locket warm against her skin. The nightmare was over. The real life was just beginning. And as James took her hand, Emma knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, not as broken people trying to heal each other, but as whole people choosing to build something beautiful from the ashes of their past.